We are all set. Welcome, Meryl, and thank you for our class tonight. We're excited.
Thank you so much for having me. So exciting. When I was thinking of what I wanted to do for this last class, I was thinking, well, everyone wants to know stuff about bread, but obviously things like doing a full sourdough loaf that can take hours up to several days, so not quite good for the format, and even something like a naan, which is a yeasted bread, does take a little bit more time than we have here. So I said, you know what? One thing that's been driving me nuts is I've been hearing from a lot of my friends that they don't know what to do if they've already gotten a sourdough starter. They've been throwing away. And I was like, do you know what you've done to get the flour? I mean, everyone's trying to find flour. So no one should ever throw away starter. Even if you have extra when you feed it, you can use it afterwards. So what is sourdough starter? Let's take a look at mine. I have not named it. So this has risen quite a lot. I feed it, I used to feed it every day, but now, you can see this bubbling too, looks great. I used to feed it every day for the month and a half it took to get mine started. It really took quite a long time. But now I'm only really baking about one loaf of bread a week, so I tend to keep it in the fridge and feed it about once a week. But so when you feed it, obviously, if you keep adding to this, you're going to get an unmanageable amount of starter. And so what I like to do is I always put like a couple ounces in a little jar in the fridge, and that will sort of be the backup in case anything weird happens, in case it gets moldy. You can always kind of go back and restart that you have. There's lots of different, I saw there was a question, how do you feed it? There's lots of different ways to feed it. Generally, you're just, you're taking flour and water, you're mixing it together at the start, you're leaving it out to capture natural yeast in the air. And then every day you will add flour and water to that, and eventually you will, and people do it in different proportions. And I'm not a master baker, so what I can tell you is that for people who are struggling to get their starters started, feeding it on a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, so keeping the same amount of starter and then giving an equal amount of water and flour seems to do well. So what that means is you will have a lot of extra of just this flour and water mixture that's a little tangy. We have made banana bread with it that's been awesome. We've made pancakes with it that's been awesome. What I'm going to show you today is how to do a scallion pancake with it. That's literally, it's a no recipe. All you need are scallions and the starter that you are putting away. So generally speaking, most of the recipes that I would use for this would use about a cup of this, so I probably wouldn't need about half of it. And so I'm going to take a cup of this. Actually, I'm going to do about a third because I don't want to do too much. I have a little cast iron pan here. The other recipes we're going to be tackling today, in addition to the sourdough scallion pancake, to use up your leftover starter, if you'll be lucky enough to have one, your sourdough crumpets. These crumpets are something, I'd never even eaten a crumpet before quarantine and everything that's been going on, but I was looking for ways to use it up. And we're going to use some mason jar lids in the hot pan to make these little, a crumpet's kind of like an English muffin, but it's much lighter and it's done in the pan. So that's what we're going to do. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on something which is sort of near and dear to my heart, which is whole wheat roti. These are a little big. These might go into chapati land. Generally speaking, roti is an Indian bread that is made with whole wheat flour and it's done on a dry griddle. If it puffs enough, we had about half puffs on these. They call them pulkas. And chapati, you would cook it in significantly more fat, and they're usually a bit bigger and thinner. One of my first personal chefing gigs, I was working with an Indian family, and I would always make the dough, but I would never, I was doing all different, saag paneer, chana masala, I was doing all these different curries and different preparations, but I would just make the dough, and then she would make the roti as she needed them, because the dough keeps pretty well in the fridge. I now also realize that the reason that she did it that way is there was absolutely no way that me being inexperienced was going to be able to get the roti nice and soft with a puff. It takes some practice, and for anyone who actually wants to tackle this recipe, you are not going to nail it on the first try, unless you have kind of an idiot savant thing going on. We'll get to the secrets to great roti. This is a great one to have on hand if you just want something quick. You can make wraps with them. It's halfway between a tortilla and a pita, and they're just really delicious, and it's a great way to have a 100% whole wheat flour bread. So let's get started on our scallion pancake. So see if I can get this to lighten up even lighter. There we go. Excellent. So I've got a little cast iron pan here. You can use a non-stick. No problem, just be a little bit careful because you are going to be putting stuff in here. You want to make sure it's well seasoned. So I've got about 1.5 teaspoons of oil. You're going to use like a little more than you think you should because we do kind of want to fry it. And I've got about 2 tablespoons here of scallion. I have a little bit of jalapeno in there too because I like that. I'm just going to season that with a pinch of salt. All right, now you can see that pretty well on screen. Oh, let's wait a second. Sometimes it heats up really quick. Sometimes it needs a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to saute the scallions just a little bit, and then we're just going to pour this over. We're going to cook it till it bubbles, and then we're going to flip it. And we're going to add some sesame seeds too, because I like that. Now, if you have something like a furikake or any kind of a seasoned seaweed mix, this would be nice to have on top, but I might wait to do it that part to the end because that part might burn. Okay, now we got some heat going. Excellent. So now I'm going to add in the rest. I did kind of a lot. Maybe it's going to be kind of a lot scallion pancake. I love that. Now, if you want to get crazy fancy, if you want to get fancy, you can cut these the long way. It might cook a little faster. That would be a little more careful. But we're just going to kind of let them go for about a minute here. And this is something that, you know, you can save up your starter. You can do it each time. No big either way. We might need a little bit more of this. We'll see what happens. I have about 1/3 of a cup here, but we may need to drizzle in a little more. I might bring my scallion circumference in. And you don't want to cook them until they're too brown because you're going to keep cooking it with this. So we're just going to pour this on top. That's okay if we don't get it all yet. We need a little more. And you can see this really happy starter right now. I'm pretty unscientific about my starter, which I know bread bakers can be pretty anal retentive. But I know kind of the consistency I want my starter to be, and I just add as much flour and water as I need to make it look like that. And I'll generally rotate between 2 or 3 different flours, just because I have flours that are from different places. I have flour from this great local mill called Ground Up Grain out in Hadley, and they are really wonderful, and the quality of the flour is great, and it's not overly processed, and it's local grains. So that is good for the starter because there's also some different yeasts and things that already are still living within the flour. So I'll rotate between that and an all-purpose. You can really use almost any kind of flour that you need. Don't ask me any questions about gluten-free starters. I have no idea. I would just use any kind of traditional flour. So we can start to see. Let's see if we can turn the light. I'm going to maybe turn this down a little bit. So just to see that it's very dark here now. So let me turn this on. Thank you. So you can get some bubbles going. Hold on, we have a rogue lighting assistant here. All right, that's gonna have to be over there. Can you turn the other lights on behind me? Yeah, thank you. Because I want to show that there's bubbles happening around here. And I think we're gonna be ready to flip in like 30 seconds. So this is something that I would really like to make for breakfast. Generally speaking, if I am keeping my starter and I'm actually doing it in the winter, to get one going, you need to get the temperature just right. And so I was leaving it on the counter and feeding it pretty much every day. And so I would have extra stuff almost every day. And so this is great to make a little pancake with in the morning. This is a fried egg, would be amazing. All right, we're almost ready. But in terms of getting a sourdough starter, you know, it's become very trendy to do it. Add some sesame seeds now. This is like doing a pancake normally, like when the bubbles start to go on top. You know, it's almost ready on the bottom. You know, it's very trendy to do sourdough these days. You know, bread is not that hard to find, and flour's gotten easier to find at the store. But what I really like is just it's nice to just make bread when you want it. Now, that being said, I don't really want to turn on my oven much these days, so doing some sort of a stovetop thing like this is great. I would like to have this with an egg for breakfast for sure. All right, a little bit more. I'm going to let that keep going, and I'm going to start to mix my batter for the crumpets. So this calls for about a cup of starter. You can tell when it's alive and happy. It kind of has this buoyancy. It's light and bubbly. So about a cup of that. So the recipe calls for 1 cup of the starter, fed or unfed. This does happen to be fed, but you could do this with the stuff that you have sitting in your fridge, your backup that you now have double of if you keep feeding it, or if you just keep the extra in the jar, you can do that. All right, let's check this real quick before we continue. Yeah, I like a little burning on the side there. It's like a little crispy. So that's that. We're gonna let that go for like another couple of minutes. I'm gonna turn my heat down. I had it about medium high, and I'm gonna go to what we got medium. So to the cup of starter, we're gonna add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We're gonna add a teaspoon of sugar, and then we're gonna add, this is a King Arthur recipe, 3/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda, which is almost half of a teaspoon. So I'm gonna do a 1/4 teaspoon, and then I'm gonna do another scant, like a scant 1/4 teaspoon, so I don't know where my 1/8 measure is. Okay. Now when you do this, it should kind of bubble up a little bit. Baking soda is taking effect. You just mix it in. Like that. And obviously you can easily double or triple this. This will make about 4, maybe 5. Obviously more if you're not using gigantic mason plates like this. All right, poking. Needs more time. So there's really no right or wrong way to do this pancake. You're gonna cook it until it's done. If you like a little doughier in the middle, leave it a little doughier. I like it somewhere in the middle, so I'm gonna let that go for just a little bit longer. Okay, that's done. Okay, let's get a plate. And we'll let that cool off a little bit. I'll just use a piece of paper towel to clean out my pan. And I'm actually going to turn my heat to low for now, since cast iron really holds on to heat. Just take any of these little burny scallion bits out. You always want to be careful doing this, but you want to make sure your pan is relatively clean and that our crumpets don't taste too much like scallions. I'm using the same pan for everything because I really like this pan and I don't want to do dishes. Okay. Now, you've got your clean metal mason jar lid. You can use large or small. I'm going to take a little bit of butter and I'm going to really liberally smear that. I'm going to turn my light on again. Okay, so all around the edge there. Now, if you have an English muffin ring, I mean, everyone has English muffin rings, right? That's what the recipe on King Arthur said. I was like, who the heck has an English muffin ring? You can use those if you are of the rarefied type that has them. But a mason jar lid, a metal one that's not rusty. If it's rusty, don't use it or scrub it really well. Will work fine. Okay, so that's really well buttered. Now, I'm going to add a little oil in my pan. I'm going to turn my heat to about medium. And probably a teaspoon of oil. This is a pretty well seasoned pan. I tend to use this on the grill a lot, and so it's gotten really well seasoned. People tend to be crazy about cast iron. Say, oh, you can't use soap or anything on it. You can use soap on your cast iron pan. You just shouldn't scrub it because someone's probably gonna go crazy at me for saying that, but it's true. The nonstick coating on a nonstick pan comes from polymerization of oils and fats, and so it actually is almost like a kind of plastic on there that's a naturally created coating, and so it's really hard to scrub off. Using acidic stuff in a cast iron pan, not a good idea, but if you're doing fish or something in a pan, you want to just give it a little extra love, go ahead and use a tiny bit of soap and just wash it out. Don't let it sit in the sink. Give it a nice little scrub. Don't use the scrubby side of the sponge, but just kind of get the soap in there, wipe it off really well, put your oil on, and you're off to the races. Again, I usually will just rub a little oil all over my pan, top and bottom, inside and outside. Okay, so we've done a little bit of oil in the pan. Now we do oil first because oil will slow the browning of the butter, which I'm about to put in. I'm going to do one at a time here. So it's going to go in. And we'll do about a quarter cup. You can see how it's nice puffy leavened. Oops, we're getting browning, so I'm going to turn my heat down already. You want it to fill it, but not go crazy. And now we can turn our heat up a little bit. Okay. So what you're looking for is about 3 or 4 minutes with this crumpet, and you're going to want to see little bubbles come up to the top, and the top will be almost set. And then we're going to take tongs, and we're going to flip them. So while we're waiting for that to go, first of all, does anyone have any questions so far? I've been kind of rolling through at my normal breakneck pace. Okay, no questions from the peanut gallery.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Susan. As far, I know you said it's equal parts water and flour. How much do you put in initially? Are you you have
well, so that's a good question. You can use any amount. I followed a recipe from my friend Andrew Janjigian over at Cooks Illustrated. I used to work there, and he's a master bread baker, and so he wanted to create a recipe that didn't use a lot of flour. So I think the initial proportions were like 10 grams of flour and 10 grams of water. So it was like literally teaspoons and tablespoons amount, really small, because the idea was that you're just getting the initial culture of the yeast up and running, and you don't need to waste a bunch of flour each time because you're trying to save your flour to actually make bread.
How do you know?
That's a great question, and I can actually demo this to you. So it took me probably about a month and a half before my starter was like really doing good. Let's see. That's not good.
A month and a half.
So you want to do something called the flow test. Just get some regular water. And you're going to get a little bit of your starter. And I mean, number one, you'll know your starter is ready when it's reliably doubling each time you feed it. The second thing is you want it to float on top of the water. Because there is air in it, because the yeast are eating the flour, the starches, and they're making carbon dioxide gas. A little bit of alcohol, actually. All right. This may be burned as I turn my...
Thank you.
Oh, don't worry. This pan also gets quite hot, so let's see. This is pretty much set. Great thing about... Oh, perfect. Okay, so we're going to flip this now with the tongs, and if I did this right, the pan should fall right off. Woo! Yeah, okay. So we have a little crumpet here, looking real cute. I'm gonna let this go for like another couple of minutes. But yeah, so that's how you know your sourdough starter is ready. It's nice out right now, and so you could even put it out, you know, if you're doing your initial flour and water mix, you could put it outside. But there's a million guys online. People get a little anal and crazy about it. Here's the deal. Yeast can't tell time. They're pretty simple organisms. You can pretty much tell when they're happy. The failures I've seen in my friends' bread baking have come when they haven't done the float test. They haven't paid attention. If the yeast looks happy, if it's doubling, if it's bubbling, if it's alive, if you give it more food for the fire, so to speak, it's going to make some pretty decent bread, at least in my personal experience. And I'm not a master bread baker. We're getting there. About another minute. So what do you do with a crumpet? I like to split them in half and put even more butter on them and eat them. This is a nice treat. I think this is easy enough that pretty much anyone who is okay working with a hot pan can do with that. In the meantime, let's see our scallion pancake. Now, if I planned ahead, I would have got some nice sesame seeds on that side. If yeast is living as a vegetarian, that is a interesting question. And the fact of the matter is that no matter what you do, you're eating yeast, whether you like it or not, because on almost anything, it lives naturally on the fruit of the skin of fruit. It lives naturally already on the flour. And so if you were to say, I'm not eating yeast because it's a living organism, you would starve, because everything in one way or another has some yeast, and vegetables are living too until we pull them out of the ground. So I would say that yeast is vegetarian. I saw another question, but I did not see the response.
Yeah.
So
we had an earlier question of how long can you save extra discard in a jar?
In the fridge, it lasts, I would say, at least a month. You could also freeze it, and you can also dry it to share if you want to, share it. All right. But it lasts kind of quite a while, as long as I tend to sort of say that you want to change your jar out each time, and just make sure that it's just make sure that the jar is clean and you shouldn't have any problems. All right, this is delicious, and I'm going to be eating it if I don't put it far away from myself. It's really tasty. But you can make a little dipping sauce for that, a little soy sauce, sesame oil, maybe some ginger and garlic, and you feel like you just got delicious takeout from a Chinese restaurant. Even though we do that anyways, it's nice to have it fresh. Sometimes it comes to you in the box and it's all like sad. And all right, I think this is feeling pretty ready. Let's see. Just gonna turn off my heat for a second. So I'm gonna let this cool, and then we'll do a bisection and see how we did for the bubbles. But that is how you make a crumpet, just using a mason jar lid and your extra sourdough starter. It's just a delightful thing. So just gonna move this aside. I need that. So I have already here some dough that I made, and I'm going to show you how to do this because there's a lot of pointers to get this right. But I'm going to sort of show you what we're aiming for. So this is a pretty well integrated whole wheat dough. And what you'll see though is it is a little bit sticky still. It's a little bit sticky, and that's okay because we're going to add more flour to this. Now the one mistake I see a lot of novice bakers doing is they want the dough to be perfectly soft, supple, and pliable. They add flour, they add flour, they add flour. You have to remember that as dough sits, it absorbs moisture. So you need to kind of be patient and always add a little bit less flour than you think. I have, and I will send proportions for this recipe, but because you may be using different kind of whole wheat flour, you may have to add more or less water, more or less flour. So this is one of those things where you sort of start with the recipe and then you do it by feel. Honestly, when I do these for my client, I actually don't measure unless she says I want a lot or a little, and then I might try to scale it up or scale it down. I add some flour to the bowl, I start adding water, and I start to feel it. But for you guys, I'm going to do like a little more detailed. So for this, we're going to need about 3 cups of whole wheat flour. Now I use, oh my God. Okay. Now this is probably not practical for most people, but in March, I said, you know what, I want to make sure I have flour on hand. We have a really good local Indian market, and I called in, I said, hey, can you bring me out a bag of the whole wheat flour for roti? And they said, sure. So, tiny bit. So it's this kind of stuff. It's about, I think it's 10 pounds. No, maybe this is a 20-pound bag. But this costs maybe $12. It's a great deal. Oftentimes organic flour is also available, but what you should see is that it's actually quite, it's 100% whole wheat flour, but it's quite fine. And so what I would say is if you aren't going to be making a trip to the Indian market, although I would say it's a good place as any to stock up on stuff. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to run out some stuff in your car, put it in your trunk. If you don't have access to the Indian style of whole wheat flour, I haven't actually not play tested this with regular whole wheat flour or with a whole wheat pastry flour, but I have a feeling the pastry flour is going to kind of be your better bet, only because it's a bit finer. But honestly, this is a pretty rustic bread, so you can experiment. Yours just, if you have a whole wheat flour that has a little bit more of the bran in it, it's a little bit rougher, you're just going to get a little bit of a rougher, more rustic bread. It won't be wrong. It'll just be different. So what we're aiming for, and this dough is probably sat for about 2 hours. You can see it's got some nice stretch gluten, but it's still pretty soft, and we're going to need some flour to roll it out. Put that aside. Okay. Let's grab my bowl. So I have measured out already 3 cups of whole wheat flour, and yeah, as you can see, the Indian whole wheat flour is really quite fine. I really recommend this, actually, if you can get it or find it, because it really is, like, quality is always great. All right, and to this I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt. The last batch I did not add enough salt, and you could definitely tell. Traditionally, you would put these a little bit of salted butter or ghee, and serve this with pretty much any thick curry instead of rice. So here we have 3 cups of flour, teaspoon of salt, just kosher salt. I'm gonna put 3 tablespoons of oil in here. Now, when I first learned to do this, this was not part of the recipe, but I found over time that this actually really helps. It helps with heating them up later, and it makes them a little bit more pliable. Okay. Now, the first one that we do when we do this will end up being technically classified as a chapati because I still have some oil in my pan. But after that one, we will be doing roti only, which would signify that we're doing it in a dry pan. So I'll probably even wipe this out a little bit before we get started. So, tricks to making roti. You want to have pretty hot water. I'm going to do about 1.5 cups of as hot as I can stand it water added to this. Now this is an interesting dough too, because if you do it right, you get a puff because there is no yeast. There are yeasted Indian breads, such as naan. So they are pretty easy to make at home, but they just take like a little bit more time. Just get hot enough. What's nice about these is that you can eat them right away. They're also pretty easy to pre-roll out, and I've even seen some people who roll them out and freeze them, and then you can kind of do them on a minute. Okay. So we'll do 1.5 cups, and we'll make adjustments as needed. Okay. So in we go. I'm gonna do almost all the water, but I'm gonna kind of hold back and see what's going on here. Okay. I could go in here with my hands, but then I'm gonna be a shaggy monster. And if you add too much water, don't freak out. You can always add a little more flour. So this is kind of coming together, but I think I am gonna add that extra 1/4 cup before it gets too incorporated, so it's not too gloppy. And you're looking for a pretty moist dough. And we're going to let this sit for at least half an hour. You could let this sit for 2 up to maybe even 4 or 5 hours, honestly. You're just giving the flour a chance to absorb. So I'm going to stop here. We're not looking for the final product yet. Once we've let it sit a little bit, we're going to add a little more flour, and we're going to knead it for just a couple minutes until it seems like it's mostly coming together, and we're going to end up with, again, this much finer, more elastic. I usually knead it with just maybe a 1/4 cup extra flour if it feels pretty sticky for about, I would say, 2 or 3 minutes, just till everything is really coming together. But now this looks nothing like that. It's quite liquidy, and that's okay because we haven't given the flour any time to absorb. So we're going to be patient, and we're going to cover it with some plastic wrap, and we're just going to kind of let it do its thing. Don't feel like you have to keep adding, because we're going to add more flour later when we need it, and then we're going to add more flour when we roll it out. So if we add too much flour now, we're going to get a very kind of dense and sticky dough. I think a lot of baking is really about feel. There is measurement involved, but at some point you also have to really pay attention to your actual ingredients as well. And so that looks pretty happy. Okay. And I like to kind of get an assembly line going. This is good if you have children, perhaps, so they can make little balls. They're probably about, say, 2 ounces. They're, but you know, fit in the palm of your hand. Those are kind of on the bigger side. Okay. And this is my way of doing it. Everyone else may have another way. But I'll add a little flour in here. Actually, some parchment paper or wax paper is fine. And I've got my rolling pin. So sometimes I've seen a lot, especially at the Indian homes I work at, I have a little bowl of flour and they'll do a little dip here, which I think is fine. And you're going to make it into a happy little ball. So I take this and I'm pulling and stretching. Pulling and stretching. This is like if you have actually made a loaf of sourdough bread, this is very similar to what you would do to shape the loaf. You're just bringing it in until it's like a happy little ball, little Bob Ross action there. And then we're going to give it one more dip. So you can see now why we want kind of a sticky dough, because we're going to add flour as we go along the way, and we don't want it to be too much. So I could, if I'm feeling a little paranoid, put the parchment over this, but I'm feeling bold and brave. We're about to get crazy with it anyways, so wait till you see what we're going to do. Now, the trick to getting your roti to puff and make it into the polka is you want to be pretty consistent about how it is rolled out. It should be all the same length. I'll turn on my cam. Come on. 3 times is the charm, not we need the lighter. Okay, so, and this is, normally a roti would be maybe a little bit smaller. I'm a little bit crazy with this one. But you want it to be pretty thin. Not so thin you can see through it, but pretty thin. And I'm going to get my pan going. So this is where the cast iron really comes in, because I know for sure this is not going to stick. But for a roti, you really don't want to use too much fat. It's a pretty healthy bread. It's 100% whole wheat. So we're just going to let that pan get pretty hot. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways to try to get the roti to puff. The first way is the way that was taught to me by my Indian client. The second way is something that somebody's nonis might do. We're going to go right onto the direct flame, which is kind of fun. Definitely be careful, not for the faint of heart. While that's heating, I'm just going to get my second one rolled out. And you can see it's a really nice pliable dough. It's soft. I'm not having to really fight with it at all. And that's because we went light on the flour in the beginning and we left it wet. Had we not done that, we would be struggling right now. You can always add more flour, but adding water once the dough has come together is a little tricky. Now, there's so many different wonderful kinds of Indian breads, like naan. You have paratha, which is a little bit of a fattier dough. It can be layered, you guys crispy layers. The chapati, which I mentioned, is this exact, well, very similar dough, but usually slightly larger and cooked with fat. porry, which is delicious. How long did I let the dough rest? At least half an hour, but up to 4, 5, 6 hours. The longer you leave it, the more chance you're giving the flour to absorb. I could say you could even probably get away with leaving it overnight. This is what I would do for my client, is we would keep it in the fridge covered, and then she would take it out and let it warm up a little bit and just go on like this. It'll last a couple days in the fridge like that, but I would say at least half an hour. An hour is ideal if you're in a rush. So this is, my pan is pretty hot right now. I'm going to turn it down to medium. You can see it's smoking a little bit. That's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to go right in. Now, there's going to be 2 sides to this roti, and we're not going to cook this one for a super duper long time because we want to have a slightly more done side and slightly less done side. And so we're going to wait till we see a few bubbles. This usually takes, I would say, 30 seconds to about a minute. Wash hands, just off here. Okay, turn my heat up just a little bit. And once I start to see a little bit of bubbling, I'll flip it over. I can't wait to go back to Savers, guys. This is where I find all my good cast iron. You see all these sad pans? They look so unloved. Oh, we got a bubble. Okay. And I take them home, and you can re-season them. This is where this one came from. Ah, lovely. Okay. So I'm going to cook the other side for about another 45 seconds. Turn the heat down a little bit. And we're going to grab a piece of paper towel. And we're going to try method number 1 to get this to pop. And this might be an abject failure. I'm not afraid to fail on camera here. And a little bit more. Once you get into a rhythm with this, it's kind of great, and you can stack them all up. For reheating, if you, it's like the next day, it's sort of like a tortilla. You want to add a little moisture to the situation. I would put a damp paper towel on top and just put it in the microwave for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Okay. So now we're going to flip it over to the first side. So we got a nice char mark here, and I'm going to pray. I'm just going to push. Yes! Ha ha! Oh, Benji would be so proud. Oh, Noni would be so proud of me. Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay, I hope this would happen. So we have puff. So this is now a polka. Hooray. Oh man. So look at that. The paper towel is not, my husband wants to know, is the paper towel wet? I was taught to do it with a wet paper towel, but I honestly feel like it's better without. Like a dry one, and also a wet one can burn your hands too much. Okay. So let's do method number 2. This is still pretty ripping hot, but that's okay. Checking for thinness. There we go. Oops. It's okay if it goes off to the side a little bit. You know, if your pan is well seasoned, it's not going to stick. Right. Well, that's going. I just want to give the visual here, see how it's like. Ooh, hot. Ooh. Oh yeah. Look at that. You put a little chole or chickpeas in there, a little sag paneer. Delicious. This is one of those great simple breads of the world. You know, you can do pitas, and they're very similar, but you have to turn your oven on for that, and I'm not doing that right now. Okay, we got a little bubble. Let's flip it over. Okay. So now comes the fun part. You guys ready? Hold on, you can't even see this. I gotta change the camera angle here. Okay. I have to look at my mug. So remember when I said that you're going to have one side be less cooked than the other, aka that first side? Well, this is why, because you're gonna go thusly. Oh, hey, and we're checking to make sure it's not totally burning. A little bit on the other side, just real quick. A little bit more. 1, 2, 3. That's about as much as it's gonna puff. We got like a 3/4 puff on that. I think that's pretty good. I have this back one at about medium heat. Get some little char marks on there, looking pretty good. I'm gonna say that's good enough for now. I'm not gonna play with fire too much. All right, camera angle back. Yeah. Okay. So 2 different ways to do roti and get them to pop. This one, I did it pretty good. Got a little layers in there. Ooh, haha. You don't have a gas stove, you've got to do it the other way with the pressing. That is how you have to do it. All right, I'm just gonna put this stuff aside. The person who just asked that question is my mother-in-law, and the answer is that I'll make them for you and you don't have to do a thing. Okay, clean as we go. I'm gonna have to clean the stove so that little bits of flour all over here. There we go. Okay, so let's check in on the crumpet for one last thing before we head to a discussion period. So, depending on your sourdough starter, you may get different, that's the thing about sourdough, is that it's actually different each time you make it. It's alive and it's changing all the time, and it will get more sour as you go. Okay, so little bubbles, it's aerated. You can give it a little toast in your pan if you want. And then you can put a little butter on it. I would usually toast it more. Sometimes I found with the sourdough that it gets this interesting like color on the inside, a little yellowy, and I don't know why. If someone's good with deep food science, they can let me know, but they taste really good. So the thing about a crumpet, which I didn't know until I made them, is they're delightfully crispy on the outside, and they're really like soft on the inside. They're just amazing. It's like a more light and airy version of a English muffin, and they're fabulous. And like you saw, it took 2 seconds to put together, 0 skill except for the tongs flipping situation. So I highly recommend that if you do have some sourdough starter, making it. Honestly, they're good enough that I would make sourdough starter just to make the crumpets, which was not the original goal. Anyways, that's that. So 3 different ways with some breads. I'm hoping to do some more of these classes focusing on different things. I am pretty interested in gluten-free baking, which you would not know from all of this, and so I would love to do a class on alternative flours and ways to add more healthful flours to your baking. I would love to do a class on how to use up those weird vegetables in your CSA box that we're all going to be getting shortly. I would love to sort of have people feel like they're confident with those. How about non-yeast bread? I see. So the roti is a non-yeast bread. There's a few other different kinds of non-yeast breads that you could make. You could do, there's an Italian one called, I think it's called piadima or something to that effect, but it's very similar. It's sort of a white flour version of this. There's lots of different things we can do. Also, I could do an actual quick breads class, but the timing it takes a little bit longer for those things, so we'd have to have some movie magic in there, with things like banana bread and those things. There's a lot of, I think everyone's made a lot of banana bread, so maybe we'll stick with that. But yeah, so if anyone has any classes they would like to take or learn, I'm very, very happy to get suggestions. I don't want to be speaking into the void. I want to do something of merit and value. I also, although I have not traditionally done this in the past, I am open to experimenting with doing one-on-one cooking lessons over Zoom or something like this, should you have something you're working on. Another one of the things I like to do that I actually don't do for any of my clients, I just do it for friends and family, is cake baking, cake decorating. And so that is something where I find a lot of people are trying to, maybe they don't want to go to the bakery or they're trying to do it themselves. So I would be happy to teach classes on the basics of that. I feel like you can watch a lot of step videos like that on, Pinterest or Instagram, any of those things. Indian food recipes, yeah. I would love to teach some Indian food, from very simple dal, chana masala, saag paneer, all these like very simple things that we get all the time from takeout. There's so much, they're really healthier at home. Home style Indian cooking is much less fatty. I mean, you can add tons of cream and butter if that's your jam. But that being said, I do find that that was the one surprise for me when I was learning from my Indian client. You know, the first two, 3 times I came, you know, even a couple months, I would kind of cook along with her and watch her. Because what I thought was how things are done is really, you know, the spicing and everything is a little bit different. And obviously it's to everybody's taste. But I just find that when you do it at home, it's really fresh, really vibrant. I know I personally in my garden have a lot of like radish greens, mustard greens, spinach, all this green stuff, and do some like saag paneer real quick at home is a really great way to use that stuff up. So Indian cooking definitely would be up there for me to teach. I saw a question about cookies. Absolutely, cookies are fun. I can also, if we're interested in cooking, I feel again like you can see a lot of, you know, step shots and how to do, you know, decorated sugar cookies like with the royal icing. That's really fun. There are a lot of challenges that we run into with that. So maybe fine tuning how to do that, if that's something you're into, would be something that we could also do. So Corinne, if we want to open it up to discussion and questions, that would be totally fine. I'm going to eat this crumpet because I can't stand it anymore. It looks so good.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating to watch. I love watching the roti puff up. And I thought the tip of using the mason jar lid for the crumpet is amazing. I love that.
Yeah. I think you would probably, I haven't tried doing it free form yet. I have a feeling that it's something about it's direct because when you put it in the pan, it gets hot itself. So I feel like there's something about it cooking evenly when it's rising up. So I think this is pretty important to it. You'll probably get some kind of a weird pancake thing if you do it without, but find some mason jar lids. I mean, this is super fun.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions or any suggestions for future topics that they would want us to look into, feel free to continue adding them to the chat. I just saw that Grania added a shortcuts idea, but you can also feel free to unmute yourself and let us know what you've been making at home, any experiments you've tried, any more questions you have. I would love to hear it.
I love the idea of kitchen shortcuts because as someone who cooks professionally, you'd really be amazed how efficient, we'll say, professional cooks can be. And by efficient, I mean kind of lazy. So there's a lot of ways that you can make things easier on yourself in the kitchen. And to think like, you know, I'm against the chefification of home cooking. I think that you should just cook. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the restaurant or fancy chef. You're cooking for your family. That's what it should be. But that being said, there's a lot of tips and tricks that chefs use to make things easier on themselves in the kitchen, which you can take home and use to do whatever it is that you want to do in your kitchen. So that's actually a great idea. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I will get some of these recipes and these tips from Meryl, and I will send everybody an email with all of that. And you can also, those will include links to Meryl's website if you wanted to get in touch with her directly with any questions. So feel free to let us know any more thoughts that you have. And I'm going to add in the chat, I've just added my email address. Feel free to send me an email with any feedback you have as well. Does anybody have anything that they've made recently that they want to tell us about?
Oh, I see something with the scallion pancake. Corinne, what was that?
Yeah, so that's my friend Tori. She tried making a scallion pancake using a starter, but she said that it didn't taste like much. The starter was pretty new, only in the past month. So would the taste change as it gets older or
Correct.
improve?
Yeah, I started mine in mid-March. It gains flavor and complexity over time, and it becomes usually more tart. My starter isn't particularly tart. I don't know why. It's just the yeast I have around. But everyone's starter is going to be a little different. But it likely was because it was new. There wasn't a lot of complexity. Starters are a little bit of a symbiosis between yeast and a few bacteria. And so it just, It takes time and patience. Add more scallions, add some sesame oil, dip it in there, it'll still taste okay if you have a newer starter.
Yeah. We had a couple more comments. Someone has made some naan, which is awesome. And then we've had someone who got a baking set for their birthday, which sounds like some fun adventures there.
I also have to say a real quick shout out to my Uncle Scott out in California. I see that you're tuning in. Thank you for coming by and hanging out in my friend Elisa's kitchen with me. Very nice to see you here.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for showing everything. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and stay tuned. We'll see if we can schedule some more cooking classes. And I hope you enjoyed. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
See you later.